Hi, my name is Ron Thornton. What we're going to cover on this tape is modeling concepts. One of the first things that you have to bear in mind when you're creating an animation for broadcast or any kind of high quality feel and look, you need to have a rough idea as to what you're going to do before you start. So what I usually do is I create a sketch, either of a storyboard or even a 3-view design drawing. Having a sketch before you start enables you to keep in mind the big picture whilst you're working on the model and to not get tied down on small details when the general scene doesn't require it. Now, in this tape we're going to be covering only the modeling aspects of turning a sketch like this into a model like this. We'll be covering the surfacing and scenes on another tape. So we might as well get straight down to it. So what I'm going to do to start off with, the overall spaceship design is basically several cylinders, all of them cylindrically mapped. So we're going to start off by building the main fuselage. So to do this, I'm going to get a disc here, pull it out, numeric, because we're going to get fairly close to it. I want to have a good 40 subdivisions. So just make that. Now, as the whole of the front section of this ship is kind of sausage shaped, what I want to do is I want to make sure that I'm staying on the z-axis at all times. So I'm going to kill the polygon there, and then I'm going to come around and get rid of some of these points. That'll do it. So let's kill those. Multiply mirror. Now that looks a bit too long, so I'm going to undo that. I'm going to go back here, try it there. That looks a bit better. So that's the basic cross-section of the front of the fuselage that I want to create for this. What I need to do now is I need to make some points in the middle because I'm going to lathe this whole thing. So I'm just going to select these 2 points here, mirror them out, and then to make sure that they're centered, I'm going to select them again, and I'm going to use set val under the tools to make sure that they're at 0, so they're exactly on the 0 axis. So now what I can do is go through and select these points and create the polygon that I'm going to lathe. Now, I'm going to be adding a little bit of detail later on to this portion here of the cylinder. So what I want to do is I want to make sure there are an extra few subdivisions in terms of the polygon structure down the front end. So what I'm going to do is make sure the polygon is selected, and then I'm going to go into add point. So I'll add a point there, one there, and one there. So it's just to make sure I've got enough. So now let's lathe it. Multiply lathe, and we look at the numeric requester, start angle 0, end angle 360. Again, I've got 40 sides here because I want to keep the roundness sufficient. If there were fewer subdivisions, then when you get close to it, you'd start to see the polygons themselves. So let's do that. One thing I always tend to do is I always tend to check which way everything's looking, because sometimes you'll lathe something and the polygons will be pointing inwards depending on which way you turn it. So at this point I'll just hit the F key, that flips all the polygons so they're now pointing outwards. So now we'll start to get into other layers and create some of the rest of the fuselage. I'm going to select these polygons here, cut them, and go to another layer and paste them. These front ones I'm going to select and use the select connected command and cut those, and then I'm going to use the K key here to kill all the polygons on this. So I'll select the point in the middle and lose that also. So now what I want to do is, if I can, in order, Sometimes it gets a bit difficult when the points are close together and you can accidentally select them out of order. That really creates a lot of problems later on, because you'll find that you've got these polygons folding over on themselves. Let's just take a closer look at that with the A key. That looks pretty good. So, putting the sausage-shaped item in the background layer, you just zoom out a little bit. I'm now going to extrude the back part of the fuselage here. So let's see, I've got 500mm grid. So I probably want to make it about 2.5 meters. So I want to go multiply, extrude, numeric. I'm going down the z-axis. I only want one segment, and I want to go 2.5 meters. So let's try that. Let's look at this. That's looking like kind of what I want. So that's good. So even though at this point the object itself is still very simple, it's never too early to start deciding on what your surface names are going to be. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start to divide up the surfaces into the different textures that are going to be mapped onto them. So let's go into polygon, surface, and let's give this a surface name of fuselage if you like. That'll do it. Then let's go to the front part and give that nose. There we go. So now we've got the two different surface names. So I can now cut this and paste it into this layer. Now, I haven't joined these two objects here, basically because of the fact that I want it to shade as a hard edge around that point. So if I had merged the points here, it would have smoothly shaded between the two. I'll be able to show you another example of that a little bit later on when we get onto the guns and the engines, which are also cylindrical shapes, but they need to be shaded properly. So, ever onward. What I'm going to do is I'm going to make a copy of this, and I'm going to put it in the end layer, just in case I make a mess up of anything. This is always a good thing to do, is to just continuously keep backups of your work as you're going along, particularly if you're going to be making something that involves a lot of different pieces. And my general philosophy tends to be to make simple shapes and then to just expand upon them and keep everything separate until the last minute when you assemble it all, and then take it into layout and start your rendering and surfacing. So, I just want to remove a couple of unwanted polygons from this, being as that both ends of this cylinder here are still there and we don't need them. So let's just get rid of those. And I hate waste. So now what I need to do is I'm going to create the front area of the airlock. There's a kind of a docking ring on the front of this ship. So let's just do a volume select here. Copy. Paste it into this layer. Let's zoom out a little bit from that. Now once again, I'm going to select the points around, trying desperately not to miss any. This can be quite a technique, doing this in one go, but it's not a problem because you can always use the shift key if you need to continue selecting in order. So now we have the polygon. The polygon is now facing the wrong direction for me to extrude it in the minus z-axis. Let's put that in the background. See, I need to go in a minus direction, and as the polygon itself, the surface normal, is facing that way, what I extrude would be inside out if I did it in that direction. So I'll flip that polygon with the F key, multiply, extrude, numeric. So I want one segment. This one, I've got 200mm. I only really want to go, say, 400mm. So I go 400mm minus, enter, and make it So now what I want to do is I want to create the rim of this nose piece, the rim of the docking area, and bevel becomes an extremely useful tool at this point. So I select the front polygon here, multiply, bevel. Now, judging by the grid size here, is 200 millimeters, probably 10 millimeters on each would be sufficient. Okay, there's a nice edge there. Now, this might not seem like much of a bevel to put on it, but what happens is when the light catches that edge, you will get a highlight on it. You'll get a specular highlight if it has any specularity in its surface. Whereas if that were just a square edge, because the computer doesn't have the sort of infinitesimal rounding that real-world organic things have, it won't give you any kind of specular highlight on that. And it's something that you have to keep in mind when you're making computer models, that even though sometimes it might look like it's going to be right, it will just have that artificial feel to it. It won't look like material has any thickness. So let's continue on here. I'm going to use bevel again. I'm going to use an inset of 30 millimeters and a shift of 0 this time. So what I'm doing there is creating thickness. I'm going to bevel again. I'm going to use an inset of 10 millimeters and a shift of minus 10 millimeters. Now what I've done is I've created a little lip there with thickness on either side of it. Now the final thing to do now is to extrude this backwards to create a recess in the front area. So again, I'm going to use bevel. Inset of 0 and a shift of minus 200. And there it is. Let me just pull up a front face display, and you can see there that there's the lip all around the edge and then there's the recess inside. And it's just a sort of demonstration as to how useful the bevel tool can be, because when you're trying to make accurate extrusions of shapes, I find it actually more useful than using extrude itself, because it always works in the direction of the surface normal. It makes it a lot easier to deal with when you're creating sort of engineered shapes, because it always extrudes in the direction of the surface normal, and it means that you're not constrained by the standard X, Y, and Z of extrude. What I want to do now is to create a little bit of detail around the inside of this to make it look as if there's something going on in there, even though a lot of this will be covered with shadow. I just want to go into another layer now, put that in the background, and the simplest detail of all obviously is a box. So let's start with that. We call these nurnies. Nurnies are sort of meaningless detail that look as if they do something, and that's part and parcel of creating something that looks realistic, is to have a constructive feel to it. Most of this consists of tubes and cubes. When you really narrow it down, it's always simple shapes, but it's the way in which you put them together that defines whether or not they look as if they might work in the real world. For example, never put a tube that just ends. You always want it to come from somewhere and go to somewhere. And that's part of getting the sort of realistic feel that we want to get here. So let's make this. And that's going to look really boring. So let's cut a hole in it. So I'll make another box here. And make that, and swap layers, and do a Shift B for Boolean and subtract it. That's got a hole in it. That's going to make it a little bit more interesting. Still not interesting enough though. So let's do a little bit more construction work here. We just need to check the background, see what we've got going on here. Okay. So what I want to do is make something that looks like a piece of a hinge here. modify drag. I can drag these points. So that's starting to get a bit of detail going on that. Polygon, I'll get this object here, select connected, multiply mirror, make, it's not exactly centered, but I think it's going to be good enough for the purposes of this. So again, let's keep going on with detail, adding more. And boxes are always good. So let's make some inlaid detail in the door here. It's probably small enough that you're not really going to notice too much. So I'm going to select connected on this box, and then I'm going to clone. A number of clones 4, offset 50 millimeters. Let's see if that does it. Now they're a bit too close together. So let's try that again, but with 70. That's better. Okay, so it's just a collection of boxes. Very handy. As that's kind of a nice repeat detail, I'm going to select connected there and do a mirror here to bring some onto the outside of our little door hinge assembly here. And again, I'm going to go in and use drag to pull the point in to give it a kind of a beveled edge. So it looks like something that would be connecting and reinforcing around the airlock there. All of this stuff really only leads to add texture. Not to be confused with texture as in a surface texture, as a texture map, but it's giving it more places for highlights to occur, and angles that aren't right angles tend to do that a lot better. When you have a right angle and a flat surface, it's usually either shiny or it's not. At least this way you'll get varying degrees of shininess across that surface. So let's select these all and do another mirror and repeat them on the bottom. Probably about there. Yeah, that'll do it. And so we're starting to get a little bit of detail in here. I'm just going to do one more thing to this, because you don't want to spend too much time just on one area of the thing. You've got to try and get the whole thing built. So let's just go objects, box, and I want that in the background layer. Make. Okay, that's about all I need in terms of detail. But the one thing I need to do now is I need to give this a surface name at least, probably 2. When using cubic image map, most detail looks as good as it needs to, but you do need to get a certain amount of variety, otherwise it just looks like a lot of the same stuff. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select connected on this one, polygon surface, and we'll call this one Nerny 1, apply, then shift key, and again select connected. Let's call this surface Nerny 2, and let's use the W key to find out the remaining ones. And we'll call those 93. Now what I'm going to do is, during the construction of this ship, anywhere where there is going to be any type of cubic image map detail, now what I will use is I'll use those 3 surface textures, Nerny 1, 2 and 3. And when we come to surfacing, I'll be giving those all a slightly different color and diffuse value to make sure that it looks like different machine pieces that are all connected together. But because they're going to be spread over the whole ship, you only still need 3 surfaces to deal with the whole lot of them. So one thing that I haven't done is I haven't named any of the surfaces on the front here. So let's polygon surface, We'll call this dock ring. Okay. And I'm going to paste this onto our fuselage. We get our hinge here. Paste that also onto our fuselage. So let's have a look. What have we got? Well, we've still got basically a sausage with a rod out the end of it. So we still need to keep moving on here. Down in the background layer here, I've got the original. Now this is going to come in handy because I'm basically going to use the original 3 times, but I'm going to change its size and shape so it doesn't quite look the same. So let's put that in the background. And just to be safe, I'm going to make another copy of this. Okay, modify size. Let's reduce this in size. That looks good. And so I don't want to move it yet because I want to add some detail. So this is going to be one of the gun pods now. So I'm going to create the gun pod still with it on the 0 axis because it makes it a lot easier to engineer detail around a cylindrical shape if you try and keep it on a known axis. As soon as you move it off, then it becomes more difficult to do cloning around a particular axis or lathing around a particular axis. So let's just leave it where it is and start to work on the gun recess itself. So actually for this what I'm going to need is I'm going to need the points on the front end of this. Now this is going to be a similar technique to what we used for the docking bay just now, but not quite the same, because I just want to make a recessed portion into which we can place all of the gun hardware on this particular point. And by this time you're probably getting sick of seeing this, but you got to do it. So now, as we're going to be recessing this hole in the front of the gun pod, got to be cognizant of which way the polygon is flipped to make sure that the inside of this is going to exist as opposed to the outside. So when you're extruding it or beveling it, you need to always bear that in mind. So again, we'll do a bevel on this and say an inset of 10 millimeters and a shift of 0. Okay, there's our lip. Now what I'm going to do is give it an inset of 0 and a shift of minus 500 millimeters. There we go. So there's the recess now. Again, let's give it a surface. Gun recess. Apply. Now, what I want to do at this point also is rename these surfaces here. So let's give that gun rear. And select connected on that. Give that a surface of gun pod. Okay, so that's done. Let's find our other piece, cut it, paste it into here. Now, here's where it's going to show up that it's very, very handy to keep these objects on the 0 axis whilst you're building them. We're going to make a little radial detail around the edge here. So, objects box. Let's bring that out to there and make that. I'm just going to select the outer polygon of this box and do a little bevel on it. Inset of 10 millimeters and a shift of 20 millimeters. That looks fine. Now let's do a drag to get the sort of shape I'm looking for. Looks pretty good. And I'm going to do the same on the inside here, keeping those same values. Alright, now I have one of the pieces of radial detail that I'm going to use. So, how many times do I want to put this around? Probably as many as 12. So, let's do a multiply clone. I want 12 total, so I don't make the mistake of putting 12 in here and put 11. Because otherwise you'll duplicate the object right over the original object. There's no offset here. 0. And the rotation around the z-axis will be 30 degrees. Hit it. And there we go. Nice little radial detail. So why do we use 30 degrees there? Obviously it's 360 degrees divided by 12 because we want 12 total. Let's give that a name. Being creative, rad tail. Okay. So I'm going to cut this and paste it into the next layer. And now let's start actually making the gun itself. Slide the pod backwards. Now, the gun, although it's going to be cylindrical in shape, is again going to have a certain amount of radial detail on it, so we're still going to keep the gun pod on the 0 axis for the time being. Now, here's a point where the shading of cylindrical objects becomes very important. And at certain times you want them to shade smoothly together, and other times you don't want them to shade smoothly together. We're going to have to go in a little while and do a little bit of editing on the face of the docking ring to make sure that shades properly. But as I go through the construction of the gun, I'll give you an idea as to why that is. So what I'm going to do is polygon points and basically make a shape that's going to be our gun here. So let's start here and just create the points as we go. Okay, now if I turn that now, that was going to be too big, so I'm going to stretch it. And using the control key to constrain the stretch to one axis only, I'm going to stretch it down there like that. Now all I need to do is I need to create the center for this, so I need to make a few more points here. So let's create one on the 0 axis there, one on the 0 axis here, and here, because I want to have a recess in the gun barrel, which is about there. Now this is going to be fun selecting this, because I've got a couple of very, very close points on the front end of the gun. So let's go point select, and go around it in order. And create our polygon. Okay, so there's the cross section of the gun. I'm going to move these 2 points out a little bit more because I want the barrel of the gun to have a little bit more beef to it, so you know when you're at the business end. So I'm just going to modify move, and again using the control key to constrain the axis of movement and move it up like that. Okay, so I want to multiply, lathe, numeric, 360. I don't really want 40 sides on this, it doesn't need it, so maybe we can drop down to 20 on this one. Go around the z-axis, make. Okay, well that looks like something. Now we're inside again, so I hit the F key and flip all the polygons. Yeah, they're pointing outwards. Now, this is an example of what I'm talking about smooth shading on cylindrical objects. If I were to turn on smoothing on this object as it is now, it will smooth not only around the circumference of it, but it will also smooth the edges across here, and it will look like a kind of doughy, blobby thing, which is obviously not what we want. We want something fairly technical looking. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go through and select these polygons here. Don't forget that there is a front face here, so these are separated by one set of polygons. Continue going, and it's selecting every other batch of polygons so that you can cut them apart. So I cut that and then paste it back in again. Now, the effect that this has now is that the surfaces will shade on a hard edge at the areas where I cut them away, yet they will still smoothly shade around the circumference. So, we have our gun. And so let's call it that. We can call it gun barrel. Can't spell. Cut and paste. Now, just looking at this now, it's very easy to see that this thing is just way too simple. It needs more stuff in here. It needs more nunnies. A lot of it we're going to get away with the image map, but I mean, you really want to feel like you're at the business end of this gun, so we're going to have to give it a little bit more stuff around here. Up until now, what we've been using for detail is pretty much cubes, so let's get onto the tubes part of it. Everything being cubes and tubes. So, objects. Let's create a disk here. And we want to make it maybe 12-sided. Okay, make. So what I want to do is I want to have a tube that's coming out of either side of the gun and then going back into the pod itself that looks as if it's some form of coolant tube or something like that. But again, following the regimen that you want to always have a tube coming from somewhere and going to somewhere. Otherwise it just doesn't look like it's going to work. Okay, so let's just do an extrude here. Well, let's check the direction of the surface normal of the polygon first. It's going the correct way, so we're going to have to extrude it along the plus x axis. So extrude numeric x. I want to go one segment, and I want to go around about 200 millimeters. And make. Okay, there we are. So we've got our tube coming out of the edge of the gun. I'm just going to move that out a little bit more. Again, using the control key to constrain it to one axis. Okay, now I'm going to select the end polygon. And as I'm going to continue extruding this, every time I do it, I need to flip the polygon. Otherwise, the pipe will basically alternate between having inside-out polygons and outside-out polygons. So I'll hit the F key to flip it, and then what I want to do is multiply lathe, numeric. Now, here I only want to go 90 degrees. Whether it's plus 90 or minus 90, we will find out. Okay, so let's position this one manually this time. And hold on, I need the numeric requester again. 20 sides is too much. Let's give it just 5. So let's try this, and that's the right way. That was lucky. So now I've made a nice little pipe bend there. As you can see, everything is facing the right way out. And as we're going through this, we want to get rid of all of the useless internal polygons. So I'll just X that one out and select the end here. Now all I want to do is simply extrude this towards the back of the ship. So I've got to hit the F key once again to make sure that the surface normal of the polygon is the right way around for an extrusion. And what we want to do here is extrude it down the plus Z axis so that it goes back into the gun pod itself. So you go extrude numeric, plus Z, segments 1, 200 millimeters, that looks great. So let's make it. And what do you know? It works. So there you have your tube. It's not quite getting into the surface of this here. You can see that there's a small gap just on the edge. So what I'm going to do is just select that polygon there, modify move, and again using control to constrain it to one axis only. Okay, that's there. So let's have a test and see what this looks like by pasting it into the other layer. I'm going to show you something here. It's not going to look that great because a tube just coming at a right angle out of another tube looks kind of goofy. So what I'm going to do is I undo that, and I'm going to create another piece to this, which is a sort of a junction box that's on the gun itself, which might be some kind of routing system for the cooling, who knows. It just wants to look like it works. It doesn't necessarily have to have any function at all. So let's go to Objects, Box, and create a box here that's just a little bit larger than the tube itself. And make. And of course at this point what I want to do is select this, select connected, and give it one of our Nerney surfaces here. Let's call this one Nerney 1. Okay, now let's just mirror this. And I think that looks like about what we want. One thing is missing though. I have not surfaced the tubes, so I'm going to do that right now. Let's use the select connected command, polygon, surface. Now, as the tubes in this model are bending all over the place, we're not going to be able to use any kind of image map based surface texture on them. Most of the time when we use tubes in creating detail like this, we'll give them one or two generic surface names, and then we'll use fractal noise usually just to kind of break the surface up a bit, give it a little bit of specularity so that it has a kick on it, but in general it's just one three-dimensional texture rather than a two-dimensional mapped texture. So let's now get this, cut it and paste it. So now we've got our gun pod with a little bit of detail on it, and I think that looks good enough to move on. Now what is going to happen here is I'm going to be duplicating this object because it's going to be one gun pod on one side of the ship and another gun pod on the other. Now for me to be able to cylindrically map those, they're all going to have separate surface names, which means what I'm going to do a little bit later on is I'm going to move it across, give a right hand gun and a left hand gun, and have all the surfaces there conform to that so that it can look more realistic. So what I want to do now, before I get too far into this, is that I want to correct the shading on the front of the docking ring here. And that's going to require zooming in quite a way because the little beveled edges that we made on this were very fine. So what this involves now is selecting just the polygons of the very lip itself. For this one it's kind of like those games you used to have where if you hit the wire you'd set an alarm off. You've got to try and get around it as carefully as possible. Oh, there's one. There's more. It's kind of a painful process, but it doesn't take too long. Sometimes it's easier just to go and every other set of polygons just click the middle one, and then the ones on either side of it will become selected. Okay, so let's deselect the ones that we don't want. There and there and there. I don't think there are any more. So now I do the whole thing again here. Cut it and then paste it back in again. Now, in the side view here, The other part of it's easy. I just go through like this, selecting all of those, cut them and paste them. Okay, so that's that bit fixed. That's going to hopefully be all we need to do right here. So let's go back to the gun and put the fuselage in the background. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to start to create the two duplicate guns. So I'm just going to modify move, control key to constrain it to one axis, and move it out like that. Let's see where we are now, and also I'm going to move it back a bit. Okay, still need a little bit more clearance. Okay, that's around about where I'm going to want it. Let's center everything up. Okay, so all the gun surface names on this will retain, and then we'll create a second set of surface names for the other gun. So we'll use multiply, mirror, set the mirror up in the middle, make. And now I use the volume select tool to select the second gun set, cut it and paste it into another layer. So at this point I want to go to polygon select, the W key, and so what have we got? We've got gun barrel, so let's select gun barrel and go polygon surface and change surface to gun barrel 2. Gun pod, select that, surface, change it to gun pod 2. This will get monotonous after a while. Let's go gun rear, select it, surface, gun rear 2. And what else have we got? Gun recess, I don't think we need to do. Got the tubes, which I don't think we need to do. Okay, so now we have the other side gun. Let's just check one more thing. Now there are two polygons there. Where are they? Let's have a look. Two fuse. Oh, they're no good anyway, so let's just cut those. Alright, so now we can cut this and paste it back into the other layer. And we can also take this entire sort of sub-assembly, cut it, and paste it in with the fuselage. Now the thing is starting to sort of show a little bit more of its three-dimensionality, what it's going to be like. So what I want to do is I want to finish off the back part of the main fuselage here and then go on to doing a little bit more detailing. So let's put that in the background layer. In fact, what I'm going to do first, just to make the screen refresh a little bit faster, I'm going to undo the paste there and keep them in another layer. So let's get into this here. Object, disk. I want to create a disk that's probably around about the same size as the overall fuselage. And of course a disk, once you extrude it into another axis, becomes a cylinder. So that might be a bit too big. Let's make it a bit smaller and center it back up again. Numeric, see how many subdivisions we've got. Probably 30 at this point would be sufficient. And make it. Okay, this looks good. Now what I want to do at the front end of this is I want to recess it in a similar way to which we did the docking ring. So let's get rid of the background and use the auto size function here. Now, another way that you can go about doing that separating for the shading when you're using the bevel tool is to actually cut the polygon clear of the object that it's connected to at the time. So what I do here is I can cut this and paste it back in again so that the polygon itself is now detached from the other object. Like if I hit the select connected, that's it, that's the only thing it's connected to. So now when I bevel it, it's going to have a hard edge here and it won't smoothly shade across it. Sometimes if you're thinking ahead, it's a bit easier to do this than it is to go in afterwards and select those surfaces, cut them out and paste them back in again. Sometimes it's easier to do that as you go, and this will be an example of that. So I'll go multiply, bevel, and once again we want to create that tiny lip to get a specular highlight and to create a thickness to the object. So I'll give it an inset of 10 millimeters and a shift of 10 millimeters. Okay, that's that done. Now, if I continue beveling at this point, that polygon is connected to the polygons of the bevel that I just created. So once again, I got to cut it, okay, and then I got to paste it back in again. Now it gets a little bit more difficult to actually select the polygon. So I'm going to make life easy on myself by selecting the back polygon and getting rid of it. Now, with any luck, the only polygon that has more than 4 points in it in this particular layer is the one that I want. So I can use the W key, and it's greater than 4 vertices. There it is, it's one polygon. So now I can select it and do the bevel again, and I can go an inset of 10 millimeters and a shift of 0 this time, and cut it and paste it, and again the W key, it's the one polygon with more than 4 vertices, and bevel it again, inset of 10 millimeters, shift is minus 10 millimeters. Okay, and again I cut it and paste it, reselect it, and one more just to get the inside here. So I want an inset of 0 and a shift of minus 800. And there you go. Okay, as you can see, you've got the cylinder with the hollow front end, but it definitely has a thickness to it. As you zoom in closer, you can see that that edge will show up. Okay, so that's the basic rear fuselage part there. So what I want to do is I'll still keep that in the foreground layer and put the rest of the fuselage in the background layer. What I want to do is create some kind of radial detail around this point here to look like it's some sort of matter intake or whatever it might be. It's all gobbledygook, it doesn't really matter, just so long as it looks like it works. And again, you sort of base things on real life. I mean, you look at rockets from science fiction or anything, they always tend to have radial detail around any kind of cylindrical fuselage. And as that's really easy to create and quick to create, that's exactly what we're going to do. So let's now force both of those into the background. Okay, so I'm looking at both of those in the background, and let's start to make this new radial detail that we want to spin around it. And we'll go for box because it's easy. Okay, so I'm going to create a box here. Let's make that and drag the point down there like that. Let's just want to move that forward so it's right to the end there. One of the things I want to do is also extrude this back so that it has some depth into the intake. So I'm going to go bevel, an inset of 0, and I want to go about 500 millimeters. That looks about right. Okay, also what I want to do is just taper it towards the top using the taper tool. When you're using the taper tool, of course, obviously you want to try and make sure that you can keep the cursor centered on the object, otherwise it'll taper off center. And using the control key to constrain, taper it rather, so that it has a little bit finer an edge on the outer part. Now let's put some more boxes in there to make it look as if it's connected to the cylindrical surface around here. So let's go objects box once more. And let's bring that up out of the surface of the fuselage there. Let's make it. And then just take the polygon on the top and do a little bevel on that of say 20 millimeters. Lovely. So there we go. So I'm just going to select this whole thing here and narrow it down a little bit, because by the time I clone this around, I don't want it to be all taken up with the detail. So I just want to stretch it, again centering the cursor, using the control key to constrain to one axis only, and just move this in. Now this is a kind of interesting little shape we've got here. Now all we have to do is give it a name, surface, and we'll call this radial fins. And let's do a clone. You might as well do it the same as before. You make 11 clones, which will give you a total of 12 all the way around, because 360 divided by 12 is 30 degrees. So I'll give that an OK. And it just so happens that it all fits perfectly. So that looks like a nice little detail there. I'm going to cut that and paste it onto here. And just looking at it, I think it might not be a bad idea. Paste it back, and then I'm going to position the cursor here. I'm going to use the R key to rotate it 90 degrees, and then I'm going to use it again to rotate it a total of 180. And just as an afterthought, that looks kind of cool there also. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut that and paste it into the fuselage also. So now what I can do is take the piece that I've already made and cut that and paste it into the main fuselage. Let's have a look at that now. So we've got a fairly decent looking shape here now. The next thing I'm going to deal with is creating the flanges around the docking ring at the front. This is sort of old technology, even though we're doing a futuristic ship here. This is the sort of stuff that's always on the old Soyuz ships and stuff like that. They always have these flanges so that the ship can connect with its docking ring. So I'm going to do something that looks like it. Won't be exactly it. So we've got the fuselage there in the background layer. And just zoom in a little bit more. Once again, this is all pretty much going to be based on cubes and tubes. It's all just boxes and cylinders pretty much, most of the detail that you ever need. So let's go in here with a box, and I'm going to create our hinge piece first. Let's move it a little bit closer here. What if I, once again, we'll do a little bit of a drag. Okay, looks pretty good. Now what I'm going to do is make our small hinge piece. So I'm going to make a cylinder. That goes across this box and is slightly bigger than it because you want it to actually show up as a detail. Now that's got way too many subdivisions on it, so I'm going to have to go in numerically again. 30 sides is just totally unfeasible there. It only needs to be maybe 10-sided at the most. And make it, okay, that looks good. So let's once again go to box, and we're going to make the actual attachment piece, and let's just make that again using drag just to get a little bit of variety in the shapes of these things. I'm going to select that whole box and mirror it on the center axis there, so it's kind of got two little connecting things. Okay, now there's one more thing to make, and that's the actual flange itself, and once again it's purely a box. It doesn't need to be anything more than that. So objects, box. Let's expand that out a bit. I'll try and take some care to keep it centered, because once again this is going to be cloned around the 0 axis. So the more centered you can keep it, the better. There we go, and make it. Now, as it stands there, it kind of looks a bit goofy. It looks like a signpost or a weird bat. So I'm going to taper it towards the top just by selecting the points on the top of the box and then using stretch with again the cursor in the middle, control key to constrain it. Okay, that looks like something now. And let's just take the face polygons and not the edge polygon and do a bevel. And that looks okay. That should be fine. Okay, so also what I want to do here is select all of this, select connected, and do a rotate, and let's rotate it around that axis there to look like it's kind of at an angle. Now I'm going to take the whole lot, multiply, clone. Now we don't need 11 clones now, we only need 3 because it's a total of 4. And the rotation around the axis, of course, is going to be 90. So let's try it. And there we go. We have our little details. Let's give it a surface name. And we'll call it dock flange. Cut it and paste it. Okay, so this thing is starting to come together now. What I want to do is I just want to create something that would connect the 2 gun pods to the main fuselage, because otherwise they're going to be floating there and it looks kind of silly. So let's just zoom in, taking a look at the whole layout thus far. Now they look a little bit too big right now, so I think probably need to reduce them in size a bit. Positioning the cursor over the middle of the ship and reducing them down. Let's check that once it's rounded up. That looks pretty good. Okay, so to connect the pods themselves to the fuselage, I'm just literally going to make a winglet out of a cylinder, and this is very easy. just a case of objects, disc, and making a very flat disc. It goes from the edge in, make it. What I'm going to do to give it a sort of an airfoil section here is I'm going to select the rear point and move it back, and that has a more streamlined feel to it. And that's all you really need to do, because it's overall going to smooth over the top of the wing surface, but you want it to be a hard edge on either end, so you don't really have to worry too much about that. So there's that, and let's just taper that towards the outside a little bit. Okay, let's bring the fuselage into the background layer as well. That looks about right. Multiply, mirror, make, and let's cut it and paste it into either one. Okay, so I might as well finish off the sub-assembly of the front of the ship now by taking these guns, copying them, and pasting them in place. Okay, now this is all connected up. What I need to do is start on the rear of the ship, which is going to have the engine pods and all of the control surfaces, flying surfaces on it. So what I want to do now is I want to make a copy of all of the rear ends of both the outriggers and the fuselage, so that I can use it as a reference for creating the rear fuselage. Here you've got the outline that we're going to have to follow. So let's put that in the background layer. And let's try a disc that will surround the whole thing. Try and get it as tight as I can around the shape. That looks pretty good. Check the numeric requester, and around this we're probably going to need about 40 subdivisions. Okay, make. Alright, now what I can do is I can select the polygon that I've created there, and I can just remove some of the points. Let's just check this. That looks better. Okay, so all I got to do now is I got to do the same on all four sides. Remove point and cut it. Remove point, cut. Remove point and cut. That looks a bit more like it. What I'm also going to do here, just to try and get the shape itself to be just a little bit more contiguous, is I'm going to use stretch to make the curves at the side just a little bit rounder. There we go. That's that done. So now we've got a polygon that conforms to the shape of the rear of all the fuselage parts so far. So let's hit A key. Obviously that's not going to want to be there, so we'll move it back to this point here. So polygon is facing in the right direction, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to extrude it backwards down the ship, which is in the plus Z direction, and I'm going to do that. Grid size is 2 meters, so I probably want to do it for about 5 meters. Extrude numeric, so I want to go Z axis, I want to go plus Z, about 5 meters, and actually what I want to do here is I want to make 5 segments to this. So let's try that. Okay, that looks pretty good. Now, I divided this up into separate segments so that we can start to mess around with the shape here, because from the side it just looks like a square block, and from the top also. So what we're going to need to do is to get it looking a little bit more aerodynamic. So what I want to do for that is I want to find out where the wing roots are going to be. And the wing roots are probably going to be just below the center line, about there. Okay, what I want to do at this point now is to create the wing root and the wings themselves. So I'm just deselect those front ones there, so we've got the last 6 on each side are selected, and I'm going to use stretch tool, position the cursor in the middle, and at approximately what you would call the center chord point of the wing. When you have a wing, the average distance from the front to the back of the wing is called the chord, and that's around about where the center of gravity, center of lift, and everything else would be. So I'm going to position that around about there and stretch it out, and also stretch it down the z-axis to taper the wings as they go out. Okay, that looks like a reasonably decent starting wing shape. I'm now going to use stretch in the face window and stretch it down the y-axis, reducing, to taper the wings toward the tip. Okay, that looks pretty reasonable. Now, what I'm going to do here is I'm actually going to remove the polygons that are on the wingtip, and I'll show you why. When using metaform subdivide on any type of shape, if you remove polygons completely, the subdivider will attempt to turn that area into a circle. And I'll show you what I mean. Let's just cut those out, and obviously as we're playing with the subdivide here, we need to remove any polygons that are greater than quads. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to subdivide it just to see how the shape is going to change. It's sometimes difficult to predict what metaform subdivide will do to a shape, so it's usually a good idea to give it a trial run first. So we'll go polygon, subdivide, nope. So obviously I've still got bigger than quads in there, so let's find out where they are. So hit the W key, we've got 1, and there it is. Let's cut that and paste it into the other layer because I want to keep it for later. Right, so let's go and run our subdivide and use metaform. Okay, now that's kind of interesting. It's giving a nice blend to the leading edge there. The only thing that's a problem is that it's really rounding off the leading edge of the wing. It's trying to round it off too much. We kind of want that a little bit sharper. So I'll undo that and use drag to pull the points that are at the very, very leading edge of the wing forward a little bit more, so that we get more of a semblance of an aerofoil section. What I also want to do at this point is give the body a little bit more contour from the side view. So what I'm going to do that is I'm going to use taper. And in the numeric requester, I'm going to use ease in and ease out. And what that will do is that will give me a nice taper towards the back of the ship, but there's more aerodynamic. Now let's try our metaform subdivide again. And it's starting to look kind of interesting. Okay, good. So let's undo that. One of the things that I'm going to have to fix here is the trailing edge of the wing, because obviously there are no polygons there at the moment, so it has a tendency to want to round off the rear part of the wing. If I redo the subdivide there, you can see that it's rounding off the back edge of the wing, which is something that we don't want. So what I'm going to do is make a pair of quads at the back. So the best way to do this is to cut the whole assembly in half. As we've got a symmetry on either side of the z-axis here, I can just work on one side only and then just mirror it and merge the points. Therefore it's saving you an awful lot of time and trouble. So let's auto center this and select these points in order at the trailing edge of the wing and create a polygon there. Check, see which way it's facing the right way, so that's good. What I'm also going to do here is I'm going to drag the top point at the back there forwards a little bit to attempt to give the trailing edge of the wing a little bit of an aerofoil section there. So again, let's test it by doing the subdivide, metaform. That's starting to look a bit more like it. So let's just check it round here. Yeah, that's looking more like it. That's what we want. Okay, so I'm going to undo it so that I can make just a few more adjustments here. Just want to select the points on the wingtip, and I want to stretch them so they're all dead flat using the control key to constrain. Okay, now they're all in a row. And what if I move? And what I'm going to do is I'm going to give a slight anhedral angle to the wing, which means it points down. You have two different ways. You have dihedral where the wing goes up, you have anhedral where the wing goes down. The thing that's kind of nice about using an anhedral angle on stuff like this is that it gives the ship a slightly more predatorial look. It was used to great effect on things like the Klingon ships in Star Trek. It's a very nice looking device. I kind of tend to overuse it, but I still like it. Okay, so now what I want to do is also take the points at the back end of the fuselage here and move them in a little bit. So there's a little bit of tapering going on at the back end. Let's do the same with these two. And I'm going to use shear for this. See how this does. That's kind of nice. So let's mirror it. Select the points in the middle and merge the points. Okay. Now let's auto size the screen, polygon, subdivide, metaform. There we go. Now that's looking like something. By the time you moved around, it's always a good idea whilst you're building to keep checking what the thing looks like in 3D, because many's a time you can make something that you think will look very cool. You can draw it from top, side and everything else, but as soon as you get it into a 3/4 angle, then it just doesn't work. This is starting to work, so this is looking quite nice. Alright, so what I want to do now is put the fuselage into the background. I actually want to put the fuselage into the background. And let's see what the overall look of the thing is. Well, that's not too bad. Alright, so let's just continue on in this vein. What I want to do is create a little device here, a little device just toward the leading edge of the actual rear body structure, so it looks like it's attached to the two outriggers that hold the guns. So I'm going to use a good old box for this again. And make it. And the drag tool. Okay. I'm going to select the points at the back of this, drag it back a little bit further because it's not quite merged in. Okay, that's great. Now what I'm going to need to do also, well, let's just mirror this first. Mirror it across there. Great. What I need to do is create a hollow front end for this. Before I do that, I want to try and make it look a little bit more interesting at the front end. It's, at the moment, it has a tendency to be just too straight, and you don't often see that on any kind of vehicle where something is just dead straight across it. It needs to have some sort of flow to the lines. So I'm going to select points, select like this bunch of middle points, and let's try moving those back and see what happens. It's kind of interesting, and it would follow logically that the center part would be a little bit further back because everything is getting a bit wider in the middle. Just seems to be a little bit more pleasing to look at that way. I can't explain the theory behind it, but it just has a tendency to be like that. So that has sort of broken it up a little bit more. Looks kind of more interesting. Just wondering whether to tweak with that anymore. I think we can probably live with it. Yeah. Okay. So now what I need to do is to select all of the front points around here, because I want to again create a metal thickness to this and then extrude it back in much the same way as we did the docking ring on the front and also the recess in the gun pods. So what I can do is I can use the encircle tool on point select, bring it up like this. That should select all the front points, copy it and paste it into another layer. Okay, there we go. Point select again in order. Go around it. And P to make a polygon. Now obviously this polygon is what you would call non-planar. You don't want to leave it in there because it would look pretty bad. So, but what, we can still use it to create the inner surfaces. So let's use the bevel again, 20 and 20, that looks pretty good. And once again what we're going to do is cut it, paste it back in again, and then use the polygon select because it's the only polygon in there with more than 4 vertices. So I'll bevel it again, inset 20 millimeters, shift -20. Okay, and we'll cut it and paste it. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to use the W key to reselect that polygon and then bevel it once more to get the inner faces. But as it's getting narrower towards the back, obviously it's got to taper a little bit more on the inside, otherwise the inside surfaces will go through the outside surfaces, which you don't want. So I've got an inset of 100 millimeters, shift to -300, let's try that. That looks pretty good. You can see that the inner surface is moving in there. What I'm going to do is just manually move it back a little bit more, using the control key to constrain everything. That doesn't look like it's punctured the surface anywhere. The only way we'll really be able to tell that though is when you render it. It can be very difficult to see whether or not you've done this from the 3 view. So the other thing that I want to do is just cut this polygon out, paste it in yet another layer, is that I want to divide it up so it would shade properly. If you just manage to even get a glimpse of the inside of it and it's not divided up properly, it will look ridiculous. It'll try and smooth shade around a surface, it'll be blinking on and off. Whenever you get a non-planar polygon, it's something that you don't want. So we have the polygon selected, then I go to point select, select those two, and then go polygon split. And that split it down the proper line there, you can see. So we go back to polygon select, okay, check it, point select, and split again. Okay, polygon select, the remaining still selected, and split. And again, polygon select, and split. Okay, Now that will now shade properly. So let's cut it and paste it back in there. So let's give this a surface name. And we'll call that surface fuse end. Right, so before I cut this and paste it back in to the main body of the ship, I need to create some surfaces here also. This particular shape is kind of handy because it lends itself very much to being planar image mapped. So we'll only need to use one image map for this surface overall, because even though it has got some surfaces on the side here, we can design the map so it doesn't look funky when it goes through those. So let's just call polygon surface, we'll call that fuse Y. That's a reminder then that that's going to be a Y-axis planar image map. Okay, now I can take the other piece, cut it, and paste it in. Okay, so it's starting to get a bit solid now, which is good. So now we've got to address the back. I want to do a little bit of the same kind of detailing work here at the back by selecting all the middle points again and doing the reverse of what we did at the front. So just move that forward a little bit. Again, it makes it a little bit more interesting to look at and breaks up a dead straight line, which you kind of don't want. I think something else that I'm going to do here as well is that as we did the subdivide on this object, the polygon that we created for the trailing edge of the wing is now divided in the middle. So what I can do is I can take that point and move it backwards and create a true sharp trailing edge to the wing. So we'll go drag and we'll grab that point there, control key to constrain, and back we go. So we'll look. That looks pretty interesting. It's starting to get something happening there. Now I think what's going to happen here, if I took all of the empty space at the back of the ship here and made a polygon and extruded it back inwards, it would look kind of strange. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make two polygons to fill in the inner part of the wing here, which gives it kind of two horns when you look at it there. Okay, so this is pretty easy to do. You can go into point select mode. Deselect those. There's that one, and that one. Check that I've only got 3 points selected and hit the P. Check that polygon. That looks right, and the surface normal is facing the right way. So I'll do the same on the other side. 1, 2, 3. And check the polygon again. That also looks fine. Now you can see we've filled in the back edge of the inboard part of the wing there. Okay. Now what we need to do is find all the remaining points on the back. So I'm just going to do this manually as we're so close in. That's them. And copy that, paste it into another layer. Same routine here. Run around, selecting as you go. And the P key to create the polygon. Now that one's facing inwards. Let's flip it. There you go, that's facing out. So, once again, it's the whole bevel technique. Inset 20 millimeters and shift 20 millimeters. Okay, cut the polygon, paste it back in, W key, select the one which is more than 4 vertices, and bevel again. Only this time let's do the inset, shift This time let's do the shift of -20. Okay, that's there. Cut the polygon, paste it back in. The W key for your statistics. Select the one with more than 4 vertices. Bevel. Inset now 0. And a shift of minus, let's say 200. Minus 200 millimeters. And there we go. Again, I'm going to move that back manually. I'm going to move it a long way in so that there's not a chance of you ever seeing the inner polygon there. And plus we're probably going to detail the inside of this a little bit more. And surface, I'm going to give it the same surface as the previous one, which is Fusint. Okay, we can cut it and paste it in. Now this whole thing is starting to become solid now. Okay. So the next thing I want to deal with is to be able to create some kind of control surface around the wingtips to just make it a little bit more interesting on the outboard edge. So far this model hasn't really got much verticality to it, so it needs a couple of pieces of detail on it that give a little bit more of a vertical feel to it. That helps a lot also in seeing which way up something is when you watch it from a distance. So let's get rid of that, and just by using a disc we can create a sort of pseudo wing shape here. That might be a little bit too subdivided. Let's make it 20 sides. Make. That looks pretty good. So points on the top. What if I stretch them? Okay, that's pretty reasonable fin. It's a little bit big though, so I'm going to reduce it down in size till the base of it's around about the same size as the wingtip, maybe a little bit smaller. So move it out. And also move it down. Now, what I want to do at this point is move in a little bit and create whatever would be joining this wing tip fin onto the wingtip itself. So again, I'm going to use a disc, center it up there, and numeric, this probably only needs to have about 12 sides to it. Make that there. Okay, we've got a cylinder there. Select the polygons at either end of it. So to make it streamlined, what I can do is bevel, multiply bevel, inset 20 millimeters, and shift 100 millimeters. Let's do it again. Inset 40 millimeters, shift 100, and one more time. Inset again 40 millimeters and 100. That looks good. What I'm going to do now is select all the back points here and stretch it out so it has a little bit sharper end at the rear. Stretch. That's kind of cool looking. Now what I'm going to do is rotate it so it's at a happy jaunty angle. And that looks like a nice little wingtip. What we need to do first here then is surface these. Select connected on that. Polygon surface. We'll call this tip fin. Okay. Selected. Polygon surface. We'll just call this wing tip. Okay. Mirror it. And then we can cut it and paste it into the main wing now. Okay, we're starting to get something here. So let's just have a look at it all together as a 3D wireframe here and see what it looks like. Okay, so that's starting to turn into something now. Good. Okay. So back to the rear end. Now all we want to do is to balance the whole model out by creating some canards. Canards are very small fins that would be on the nose of an aircraft. It's kind of different way around to a normal airplane. So let's have a look here. Get the other fuselage in the background. Yeah, so it definitely looks a little bit tail heavy with this. So balancing it out would definitely help, and a pair of canards will do that. As we already have a fin made, what I can do here is copy that and paste it into an empty layer. Then I can just move it around. I just rotate it because I want to make sure that it's not right in front of the gun, because that would be kind of stupid. Do you have the gun blow the canard off the thing? It'd be kind of ridiculous. So just size it up a little bit more. See what that looks like. Okay, that looks pretty cool. Mirror. Make. And let's give it another surface name, obviously. Canards. Okay. Cut that and paste it into the forward fuselage. Now really all I need to do is create an engine at the back here. And one other thing, when you look at the overall shape now, it's very obvious that there's a real low spot at the back here. It looks a little bit funky in that it's tapering a little bit too much towards the back. Now we can cure that quite easily just by giving it a really huge engine. So most engines are cylindrical, so we'll start off with a cylinder just at the back here for the main engine. Check how many subdivisions around it. 12 won't be enough, probably want about 20 at this point. Let's make that. Okay, now what we're going to need to do here is to start to create some detail texture at the back, and also at the same time we want to create a little bit more verticality here. So maybe some kind of just slightly aerodynamic fairing or something similar to that. So first of all, let's go for the fairing. So I'm going to go to another layer and put that in the background along with the wing. Here's where ball can be useful. Make a ball, and then what I'll do is just use the R key to rotate it. And let's cut the bottom off it. Okay. We've got a kind of rugby ball shape here. It's okay, but it doesn't look particularly aerodynamic. So what we can do is select the tail end and do a stretch again. That has a tendency to give it a more bullet shape. Okay, let's just size that down a bit. Move it in. I'll zoom in and just make sure that I've got it absolutely in the middle. That's better. Now what I can do is move it down and check also that it's going in to the cylinder that we're going to use for the engine, because it wants to all fit together without any gaps. Let's have a look there. That looks pretty interesting. Okay, one more little addition to this. I'm going to select these two polygons here, and I'm going to move them up. Stretch it to get a little bit thinner at the top. So you've got a taper to it. That looks pretty good. So let's try a subdivide on this. That doesn't look any good, but there's a way around that. If I cut the top polygons out and then do a subdivide, that's better. What I need to do now, select these upper polygons and move them in. I'm just checking the shape. That looks kind of like what I want. As you can tell, a lot of this is making it up as you go along, because that's part and parcel of designing. When you've got to design something fairly quickly and you haven't got time to make detailed blueprints, it's almost as if you have to ad-lib your way through building a lot of this detail. It's a case of knowing exactly how much you're going to be able to get away with and how much is really necessary. So let's just get the top of this tail fin here flat. Okay, that's good. And let's give this a surface. Center fin. Okay. I can cut that. Paste it there. And now start to deal with some of the engine stuff. Okay. Now there's a great deal of space at the back of the ship that we've got to fill in with detail. And the best way to do that is to start off by blocking in the detail with large pieces, and gradually get smaller and smaller. Otherwise, what you have a tendency to do is to work away on a tiny little portion of the thing, and then when you render it up, you realize that you haven't anywhere near filled the cavity with the amount of detail that you're going to need to. So let's try this. Actually, I have to surface that first. Polygon surface. We'll call this hinge sill. Paste. Okay, now we can work on it. So let's start off with a box that kind of almost fills that whole cavity there. Okay, this is a good basis. First thing I want to do is cut a hole in this to make it look a little bit more interesting. So I'm going to create a cube in another layer here, make that, and swap the layers. Then use Shift B, Boolean, and subtract. There we go. It's got a nice little notch out of that. Select the face polygon on this and do a little bevel on it. That looks good. Okay. Now let's zoom into this a bit. I just want to add a little bit more detail to it. So let's take a box, get over the end there, and make that. Select the top polygon of the box and bevel it with an inset of 5. Now move it manually up and do a little stretch on it here. Okay, let's look at this in the 3D view. It's kind of interesting. Now what I can do is use the select connected. Let's try and make a cooling fin type affair out of this. I'm just going to stretch that in so it's a little bit narrower and do a clone. So I'm going to be cloning along the plus X axis here. So let's hit clone. Let's make 6 of them. And we're going to be going along the X axis, but we don't want any rotation on it. So we're at 0 in the rotation there. And X. Grid size is 100 millimeters. Maybe we want to have one every 50 millimeters. Let's try that. There you go, that looks quite good. Something that's missing now in the back here is any kind of round detail. So let's make some. Ball is as good as any. Make it stick out of the back a bit. So it could be some kind of pressure tank or antenna or whatever it might be. And actually what I should do is do that in another layer. So let's select this, cut it, paste it into another layer, use a volume select to get rid of the back half of it. And let's give this the same surface as tubes. Okay, great. Again, let's add a few more boxes to this because it's just not detailed enough yet. You can just go crazy with this The thing is that there is no limit to the amount of detail you need to put on it. It's just governed by the shot. If you're going to get really close to something, then you've got to detail the hell out of it. Otherwise, try and keep it as sparse as possible, because then you don't run into any aliasing problems which you get when you have lots of minute detail. And also it saves on your polygon count, which means your rendering times will be a lot less. Okay, what I want to do at this point now is to have a look at a solid view. Yeah, it looks pretty interesting. I think that polygon on the front of that box needs to move out a bit. That's better. Okay. So now let's surface this, and what I want to do is the main box let's give it one of our Nerney surfaces. We'll call that Nerney 1. The fins, which I should select along here probably. Fins we can give Nerney 2 to. And these two guys, we'll give them Nerney 3. Okay. Now as you look at that in the back there's that nice little space here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the wing itself in the background layer here, and I'm going to make a box for the time being that maybe comes out a little bit further. Just make that, and then again I'll put another little detail box there. And just to finish it off, one more slightly off center. There. Okay, let's just select those and give them a surface. And we'll call them Nerney 3, why not? Okay, so there's as much detail as I'm going to put in the back for the time being and for the shot that we want. As I say, if you were going to be closer to it, then you'd put more detail in. And you use the same techniques. Tubes and cubes and spheres is all you need. It's just keeping a record of what surfaces you're using and getting a bit of variety in there, so it doesn't just look like a mush. So let's just mirror this. Check it. I'm going to cut it and paste it into the wing. Okay, we're pretty close. Now all I want to do is create an engine. And this, because the fuselage itself is on the 0 axis again, it's going to be quite easy. I can lathe the whole thing. So let's just zoom in a little bit more. There we go, polygon points. Let's just start here. Okay, and a P button. That's my cross section. Multiply lathe. Well, this time we want to go 360, and we want to have, say, 20 sides. And it's down the Z-axis. Now, unfortunately, the axis isn't in the middle there, so let's go back to numeric again and change it so that it's 0, 0, and 0. Okay, now it's right in the middle. Let's make it. That's not right. Ah, I see why. Now I built that off center axis, so I'm just going to move it into the middle. Probably the quickest way to do that would be to set val on the x-axis to 0 meters, bang, and it brings it right into the middle. Now we can multiply, lathe, numeric, okay, and make. Okay, there it is. So, zoom in a bit. Now once again, I want to do the selection of the polygons. Notice they're all pointing inwards as well. You cut that and paste it back. Just hit the F key to flip them so everything's pointing outwards, the way it should be. Let's just zoom in a little bit more. And let's just select these edge polygons here. Deselect those. They're all selected. Let's just cut that and paste it. Okay, now that should shade properly. Let's give it a surface. Engine. And just add one more thing, and I'm going to create a little bit of radial detail around here using the same technique as before, just basically making a box. Dragging part of the box down there. Let's even pull this in a little bit. Select all that, multiply clone. We're going to have no offset on the clone, it's going to be 0. Let's go for our 11 number of clones, and it's around the z-axis 30 degrees. Again, 360 divided by 12 is 30, so there we go. So we've got a nice little radial detail around that. Let's cut that and paste it in. There's just one more little thing I want to fix here, that the fuselage itself is bigger back here than the wing section. So what I need to do is I need to slightly move this forward and decrease the size of it. So I'm going to do that on the main area here. Let's just do a volume select, move it, use the control key to constrain it. Let's get it up there. I'll zoom in a little bit. Let's see how we're doing. Now it's still a little bit bigger than the wing section there. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to enlarge the wing section overall. So let's just modify size. Notice size is moving it backwards there, because depending upon what window you're in will govern which direction in which it moves. It has a tendency to move towards or away from 0. So let's put that back in. That's a bit too much. That looks about right. Okay, so there's our ship now pretty much complete. There's just one more little piece of detail that I want to cover, and as I mentioned at the beginning, I want to put a bit of detail on the sausage-shaped piece at the front of the ship, and that's why I subdivided it up. So let's get into that. what I'm going to do is I'm going to select connected on this and cut it out of this layer, because otherwise it's just going to take too long to redraw. Okay, there we go. So what I want to do here is make a little recessed piece that we can put some detail in on the top here. So let's just select everything that we need and cut it. Now what I want to do is flip those and do a smooth shift of about 100 millimeters. Okay, let's see which way everything's facing. Everything's facing the wrong way, good. Change it around the other way. So now we've got our nice little recessed piece. So let's add a little bit of detail into this recessed portion that we've created. Let's start off with a box and just fleshing it out slowly but surely. Like that. Let's make another longer one to run down the middle here, kind of mimicking the shape of the recess as much as possible. Sometimes it's a good idea also to create the piece of detail that you want to recess into the thing first and then make your recess, just Boolean cut it out, but in this case it was easier just to do a surface shift. So let's just keep moving on this. Let's make that, and with drag, again to sort of follow the lines of the ship a little bit more. Select connected, so multiply it and mirror. Then select these guys, connected, and mirror it again. Just adding little pieces of detail. You won't really detect any shape in this at all when the ship is moving by you, but you'll just pick up on the fact that there's something there. Just do something at the back here. And find a quick way around this. Apply bevel. Okay, and just stretch it out a little bit. In fact, actually, if I do it from here, stretch it outwards and down. And polygon surface, we'll change the whole thing to 92. And then just have some selected pieces that will surface as 91. Okay. Let's paste that in here. And paste that back in here. Okay, and there's our recessed piece of detail. So let's now paste that back into the main ship. And do an auto size.
Video professional. The elements of this videotape represent